The Continence of King Francis I by Honoré de Balzac. Everyone knows through what adventure King Francis I of that name was taken like a silly bird, and led into the town of Madrid in Spain. There the Emperor Charles Roman V kept him carefully locked up like an article of great value, in one of his castles, in the which our defunct sire of immortal memory soon became listless and weary, seeing that he loved the open air and his little comforts, and no more understood being shut up in a cage than a cat would folding up lace. He fell into moods of such strange melancholy, that his letters having been read in full council, Madame d'Angoulême, his mother, Madame Catherine, the Dauphin Monsieur de Montmorency, and those who were at the head of affairs in France, knowing the great lechery of the king, determined, after mature deliberation, to send Queen Marguerite to him, from whom he would doubtless receive alleviation of his sufferings, that good lady being much loved by him and merry, and learned in all necessary wisdom, but she alleging that it would be dangerous for her soul, because it was impossible for her without great danger to be alone with the king in his cell, a sharp secretary, the Sieur de Fizes, was sent to the court of Rome with orders to beg of the pontiff a papal brief of special indulgences, containing proper absolutions for the petty sins which, looking at their consanguinity, the said queen might commit with a view to cure the king's melancholy. At this time Adrian Roman VI, the Dutchman, still wore the tiara, who, a good fellow for the rest, did not forget, in spite of the scholastic ties which united him to the emperor, that the eldest son of the Catholic Church was concerned in the affair, and was good enough to send to Spain an express legate, furnished with full powers to attempt the salvation of the queen's soul and the king's body without prejudice to guard this most urgent affair, made the gentleman very uneasy, and caused an itching in the feet of the ladies, who, from great devotion to the crown, would all have offered to go to Madrid, but for the dark mistrust of Charles V, who would not grant the king's permission to any of his subjects, nor even the members of his family. It was therefore necessary to negotiate the departure of the Queen of Navarre. Then nothing else was spoken about but this deplorable abstinence, and the lack of amorous exercise, so vexatious to a prince, who was much accustomed to it. In short, from one thing to another the women finished by thinking more of the king's condition than of the king himself. The queen was the first to say that she wished she had wings. To this Monseigneur Audit de Chatelain replied that she had no need of them to be an angel. One that was Madame L'Amorale blamed God, that it was not possible to send by a messenger that which the poor king so much required, and every one of the ladies would have lent it in her turn. God has done very well to fix it, said the Dauphin quietly, for our husbands would leave us rather badly off during their absence. So much was said, and so much thought upon the subject, that at her departure the Queen of all Marguerites was charged by these good Christians to kiss the captive heartily for all the ladies of the realm, and if it had been permissible to prepare pleasure, like mustard, the queen would have been laden with enough to sell to the two Castiles. While Madame Marguerite was, in spite of the snow, crossing the mountains by relays of mule, hurrying on to these consolations, as to a fire, the king found himself harder pressed by unsatisfied desire than he had ever been before or would be again in this reverberation of nature. He opened his heart to the Emperor Charles in order that he might be provided with a merciful specific, urging upon him that it would be an everlasting disgrace to one king to let another die for lack of gallantry. The Castilian showed himself to be a generous man, thinking that he would be able to recuperate himself for the favor granted out of his guest's ransom. He hinted quietly to the people commissioned to guard the prisoner that they might gratify him in this respect. Thereupon a certain Don Hios de Lara, y Lopez Barradi Pinto, a poor captain whose pockets were empty in spite of his genealogy, and who had been for some time thinking of seeking his fortune at the court of France, fancied that by procuring his majesty a soft cataplasm of warm flesh, he would open for himself an honestly fertile door. And indeed those who know the character of the good king and his court can decide if he deceived himself. When the above-mentioned captain came in his turn into the chamber of the French king, he asked him respectfully if it was his good pleasure to permit him an interrogation on a subject concerning which he was as curious as about papal indulgences, to which the prince, casting aside his hypochondriacal demeanour and twisting round on the chair in which he was seated, gave a sign of consent. The captain begged him not to be offended at the license of his language, and confessed to him that he, the king, was said to be one of the most amorous men in France, and he would be glad to learn from him if the ladies of the court were expert in the adventures of love. The poor king, calling to mind his many adventures, gave vent to a deep-drawn sigh, and exclaimed that no woman of any country, including those of the moon, knew better than the ladies of France the secrets of this alchemy, and at the remembrance of the savoury, gracious, and vigorous fondling of one alone, he felt himself the man were she then within his reach to clasp her to his heart, even on a rotten plank, 100 feet above a precipice. Say which this good king a ribald fellow if ever there was one shot forth so fiercely life and light from his eyes, that the captain though a brave man felt a quaking in his inside, so fiercely flamed the sacred majesty of royal love, but recovering his courage, he began to defend the Spanish ladies, declaring that in Castile alone was love properly understood, because it was the most religious place in Christendom, and the more fear the women had of damning themselves by yielding to a lover the more their souls were in the affair, because they knew they must take their pleasure then against eternity. He further added that if the Lord King would wager one of the best and most profitable manors in the kingdom of France, he would give him a Spanish night of love, in which a casual queen should unless he took care draw his soul from his body. Done, said the king, jumping from his chair, ill, give thee by God the manor of Villo dames in my province of Turin, with full privilege of chase of high and low jurisdiction. Then the captain, who was acquainted with the donna of the Cardinal Archbishop of Toledo, requested her to smother the King of France with kindness, and demonstrate to him the great advantage of the Castilian imagination over the simple movement of the French, to which the Marquesa of Amisci consented for the honour of Spain, and also for the pleasure of knowing of what paste God made kings, a matter in which she was ignorant, having experience only of the princes of the church. Then she became passionate as a lion that has broken out of his cage, and made the bones of the king crack in a manner that would have killed any other man. But the above-named lord was so well furnished, so greedy, and so well bitten he no longer felt a bite, and from this terrible duel the Marquesa emerged abashed, believing she had the devil to confess. The captain, confident in his agent, came to salute his lord, thinking to do honour for his fief. Thereupon the king said to him in a jocular manner that the Spanish ladies were of a passable temperature, and their system a fair one, but that when gentleness was required they substituted frenzy, that he kept fancying each thrill was a sneeze or a case of violence, in short that the embrace of a French woman brought back the drinker more thirsty than ever, tiring him never, and that with the ladies of his court love was a gentle pleasure without parallel, and not the labour of a master baker in his kneading trough. The poor captain was strongly piqued at his language, in spite of the nice sense of honour which the king pretended to possess. He fancied that his majesty wished to bilk him like a student, stealing a slice of love at a brothel in Paris, nevertheless not knowing for the matter of that, if the Marquesa had not over-Spanished the king, he demanded his revenge from the captive, pledging him his word that he should have for certain a veritable fay, and that he would yet gain the fief. The king was too courteous and gallant a knight to refuse this request, and even made a pretty and right royal speech, intimating his desire to lose the wager. Then after vespers the guard passed fresh and warm into the king's chamber, a lady most dazzlingly white, most delicately wanton, with long tresses and velvet hands, filling out her dress at the least movement, for she was gracefully plump, with a laughing mouth and eyes moist in advance, a woman to beautify hell, and whose first word had such cordial power that the king's garment was cracked by it on the morrow. After the fair one had slipped out after the king's breakfast, the good captain came radiant and triumphant into the chamber. At sight of him the prisoner then exclaimed, "Baron de la Villodames, God grant you joys like to mine. I like my jail-buyer lady. I will not judge between the love of our lands, but pay the wager." "I was sure of it," said the captain. "How so?" said the king. "Sire, it was my wife." This was the origin of Larrey de la Villodames in our country, since from corruption of the names that of Larrey Lopez finished by becoming Larrey. It was a good family delighting in serving the kings of France, and it multiplied exceedingly soon, after the Queen of Navarre came in due course to the king, who, weary of Spanish customs, wished to disport himself after the fashion of France. But remainder is not the subject of this narrative. I reserve to myself the right to relate elsewhere how the legate managed to sponge the sin of the thing off the great slate, and the delicate remark of our Queen of Marguerites, who merits a saint's niche in this collection, she who first concocted such good stories. The morality of this one is easy to understand. In the first place, kings should never let themselves be taken in battle any more than their archetype in the game of the Grecian chief Palames. But from this it appears the captivity of its king is a most calamitous and horrible evil to fall on the populace. If it had been a queen or even a princess, what worse fate? But I believe the thing could not happen again. Except with cannibals can there ever be a reason for imprisoning the flower of a realm. I think too well of Ashtaroth Lucifer, and others to imagine that did they reign they would hide the joy of all the beneficent light at which poor sufferers warm themselves, and it was necessary that the worst of devils id est, a wicked old heretic woman should find herself upon a throne to keep a prisoner sweet Mary of Scotland, to the shame of all the knights of Christendom, who should have come without previous assignation to the foot of Fotheringay, and have left thereof no single stone.